Thanks, Mike. It's so nice to be here and doing this alumni panel. So I just want to introduce the three folks who are going to be speaking. Everyone will speak briefly for 10 to 15 minutes, give us an update on what they are doing, and then we'll have a little bit of time for some questions or just to say hi and have some discussion. So Mike Rahfaldt is the executive director of Children's Radio Foundation, where he oversees the international operations from Cape Town, South Africa. Before he joined Children's Radio Foundation, Mike taught media and anthropology at the University of Cape Town. As a journalist, he has contributed to Public Radio International, BBC World Service, NPR, and the New York Times. I'm going to go ahead and introduce everybody up front, and then we'll cycle through. So Lani Teves, who is in the Department of American Culture here, is an associate professor in women's studies at the University of Hawaii. She's written about Hawaiian hip hop, film, and sexuality in the Pacific. She specializes in theorizing alternate forms of Kanaka Maoli gender performance and recognition politics. She's also the author of Defiant Indigeneity: The Politics of Hawaiian Performance. And finally, Masimba Hwati is a multidisciplinary artist working at the intersections of sculpture, video performance, and sound. Hwati explores the transformation and evolution of knowledge systems that are indigenous to his own background while experimenting with symbolism and perceptions attached to cultural objects expressed as an art movement known as the energy of objects. So I'm going to stop there and I'm going to pass it off first. We're going to go in chronological order. So we're going to start with Mike, who I know because he was my GSI when I was an undergrad. And he was also one of the very first graduate students involved with the Center for World Performance Studies. So it feels really fitting to have him kick us off. So I'll pass it to you, Mike.
Chronological order is oldest person first, basically. Right. It's really awesome to be here. And thanks for having me. It's actually 6 p.m. in Cape Town. The sun is setting. You might see this little line that's shooting through my screen. I'll even show you. There's the sun setting really beautifully. I should probably just give you that image as opposed to looking at me speaking about what I'm doing. But it's really great to be here and to speak to people who are so involved in this center that was so important in my life and in my career. And I'm sure, knowing some people here who've been around since the very beginning, Judith and Lester, Kelly, it's so great to see you here as well. Amy, Christiane, others in the room. And I'm sure there are people who are new to the center. But for me, I'd like to speak about my work a bit and just kind of think about how my experience in the center and at the University of Michigan really has stuck with me in everything and all that I do. And I like to say I have a musician background, and I really bring that to all of my work because I don't actively play any kind of instrument anymore. But music is still very much in the foreground of all that I do and how I maneuver through the world, and particularly through my work, as you will hear. Some people on this call probably know I have a bit of a sort of sad after school television special kind of story of my music and my performance career. I was a trumpet player also, Ingrid, and had my eyes on being a performer. And at the end of my undergraduate career, I had a pretty serious dental surgery that basically ended it. So it was time for plan B. And I came to study music history at the University of Michigan and was wisely persuaded by the super wonderful Judith Becker, who was the head of the program at the time, to enroll in a PhD in ethnomusicology. And I still remember sitting in Judith's office and her convincing me that this was the right choice for me, and it certainly was. And the ethnomusicology program and the amazing people there, and also just the interdisciplinary public-facing culture of the University of Michigan was just what I needed, even if I didn't know that at that point. And it still really sticks with me today. So I've actually been, 2 months from now, I will have been in South Africa for 20 years from the first time that I came. And the first thing that brought me here was a grant thank you for the money, from the Center for World Performance Studies. And particularly on the kind of suggestion of Kelly Askew that it might be an interesting place to do some of the research that I was interested in. And you know, to Kelly and Judith, I just owe so much, and I can't imagine having this really fun career trajectory that I've had and being in this country that I love with really without their advice and their care over the years. So, and so many other really great people at the University of Michigan. And so my PhD looked at the ways that teenagers listen to radio, and particularly how they identified with music radio stations, and developed relationships with music DJs and particular stations, and what that meant to some of the life choices that they were making and how they understood themselves as teenagers out there in the world. And all of this was happening really when HIV was exploding in South Africa, and where people really saw radio as playing this massive role in teaching young people about HIV. So part of my research was really steeped in making radio with teenagers. And this is again something that started at the University of Michigan. I was involved in the wonderful WCBN, which I'm sure many of you, fabulous campus station that many of you know. And I also led a few youth radio programs as part of as Ingrid mentioned, the Arts of Citizenship program, and David Scobie and Julie Ellison. And I worked with University of Michigan students to produce public radio stories for the NPR station WUOM. And we did this really interesting series commemorating the 50th anniversary of Brown versus the Board of Education. And I saw in that process the power of radio with young people, and in this case, undergraduate University of Michigan students, and really brought it sort of front and center to my PhD methodology and also into my professional work at a later stage. Those who know me well probably would understand this statement. I mean, I never had it on my radar to be an academic for a long time. It just wasn't something I was interested in. I loved and still love teaching, and I taught in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Cape Town for about 7 years, but I also did it part-time while I was reporting for NPR, and I was working on youth radio projects in prison, and I was saying yes to every opportunity that everyone presented me with. And it's one thing that I've really kind of come to understand is that I myself realized at that stage that I'm really interested in, you know, my working self and my creative self really much prefer short-term deep dives into something, which made as some of you know, sitting in this call, completing a long-term dissertation a little bit hard and maybe took a little bit longer than it should have. That's another story for another day. But to that note, I often think about the sort of interaction between anthropology, ethnomusicology, music, performance, and journalism. And I often tell journalists there's just so much to learn from anthropology and from its care, for instance, and the way in sort of the practices of ethnography. But I also think there are so many things that, you know, anthropologists can learn from journalism. And for me, one of them was really, how can we do sort of shorter, quicker, more public things? You know, when can our research and the work that we're doing be sort of good enough and done enough to share with the general public? And maybe some of you in this call identify with this. But this is something that I really learned through my participation in the center and other University of Michigan environments, where there were so many people doing public space, public facing things, and that was a possibility within this environment of doing a PhD. And for me, that public was radio and continues to be radio. You know, recording and bringing out the stories of other people. But at the same time, I still love and do a little bit of teaching and make sort of regular cameos into the Introduction to Anthropology course at the University of Cape Town, and take every opportunity to proselytize people as to how amazing radio is in every opportunity. I want to just share a quick little slideshow, if I can. Let me just see if I can, oops. Need to share my screen. One moment, please. Are you all able to see my screen?
Looks
I hope.
good.
Cool, thanks. So my radio work with youth really led to the formation of the Children's Radio Foundation, where I'm currently the director. I've been the director for 10 years, and we work across 5 countries and train youth as radio reporters to really take on issues that are important to young people in their communities. The youth that we work with, they produce programs in all local languages and are really looking to reflect the concerns of young people in their community, and take those skills with them even beyond the radio station into their lives. I like to say, radio skills are life skills, learning how to interview, how to even approach someone to ask them if you can interview them. These are very valuable skills that young people take into a lot of different places. And so as a director, I really spend my days trying to raise loads of money, or, it's hard, it's certainly harder in this environment. And to many, I think the fundraising of anything sounds super harrowing, but I love it. And it's really great to have something that you do and you're trying to raise money for and you really believe in and you want to get other people on board. And also to be working with an organization that is extra critical of some of the, the politics of nonprofits, of aid, and to be working with people all across the continent who are actively trying to dismantle some of those problematics associated with the nonprofit sector. So at the core of our work is how local youth experiences are. If you think about it, a young person growing up in a particular neighborhood, and this is true obviously outside of where we work across Africa, their outcomes in life are very much dictated by the education they have access to, the health they have access to, governance, etc. And so what we really try to do is imagine how local radio stations can play a role in responding to the needs of youth and really create a space for them to talk about important things, sometimes anonymously, talking about sensitive things. And really what we're trying to do is push the conversation forward about a range of topics with our radio station projects. I want to play just a short video that I think gives you a sense of what we're doing. And this is a program we have been running for 5 years in Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo. And Ingrid, maybe you can give me a thumbs up to make sure you can hear the sound in the video, because I know that's sometimes an issue with Zoom.
En 2011, la famille a appris que j'étais homosexuel. Et c'était dur pour moi. J'étais limite chassé de la maison, quoi. Même à l'extérieur, parce que je voulais plus jouer un jeu, je voulais plus faire semblant d'être quelqu'un que j'étais pas. J'ai donc appris à tous mes amis que j'étais homosexuel. Je voyais que pour beaucoup de personnes, c'était dur à vivre, quoi. En gros, dans la pratique comme ça, il n'y a pas de loi homophobe. Mais cette absence de loi n'aide pas aussi. C'est ainsi que dès que j'ai eu mon diplôme, je me suis dit, il faudrait que je fasse quelque chose. Mon nom, c'est Patou Isaac. Je suis congolais et je vis à Kinshasa. Ce qui a motivé la création de Génialissime, c'est mon coming out. Notre mission, c'est de faire en sorte que la population en général puisse changer sa manière de percevoir les LGBTI. On fait beaucoup d'actions à Génialissime. Les jeunes, ils viennent et ils parlent d'eux-mêmes, ce qu'ils aimeraient voir changer dans la société. Ils parlent des faits qu'on n'a pas l'habitude d'entendre. Et nous, on transforme ces débats en émissions radio qu'on met en ligne.
Tout lutter contre la stigmatisation envers les PD, les lesbiennes, les bisexuels,
la radio, c'est l'outil parfait parce que ça atteint tout le monde et ça me permet à moi d'exprimer et de parler des choses qu'on ne parlerait pas dans les autres chaînes forcément. C'est un mélange de tout. On peut apprendre et redonner. C'est l'espace parfait pour partager et pour grandir dans ses pensées après. Je comprends. Ce militantisme a beaucoup de conséquences sur ma vie personnelle. Je vis avec un homme et c'est pas parce qu'il est homosexuel qu'il a besoin que tout le monde le sache. Quand je m'expose, j'expose un peu une partie de sa vie et ça crée des tensions dans le couple. C'est pas toujours plaisant de vivre comme ça, mais ce que je fais, ça va aider des gens qui viendront après moi. La population homosexuelle africaine, ce sont des Africains. Il faudrait leur donner la chance de contribuer au développement du pays. Les discriminations, les stigmatisations, ça n'aide en rien. Mais il faut plutôt voir le bon que tu peux avoir en l'autre. Et c'est comme ça que tu vas grandir en tant que personne et que tu auras aussi quelque chose à partager après. Oui, je suis un optimiste parce que pour moi, agir, c'est déjà changer les choses.
So that gives you a sense of how we work, and this work carries out across a number of countries, 5 main countries that we work in, and across basically all social issues. So we work across health and education, climate change, human rights, basically any issue that's affecting young people. And over the last year, or 2020, you can imagine we did a lot of work around COVID, and not just sharing information about preventing COVID and sharing kind of public health information, but also creating spaces for young people to speak about their future and their worries about disrupted education, and really thinking of how radio stations can play a bit of a mental health role for young people across the continent. And now actually we're doing a lot of work around COVID vaccines, and not necessarily working to kind of push vaccines on people, but understanding that there's a very complex history of vaccines in Africa and perceptions of the role of vaccines. So really using radio stations to create a dialogue to really help communities kind of have productive conversations about vaccines. Just gives you a sense of kind of how we reach almost 10 million listeners across all of our radio station partners, broadcast in many local languages. I think that's also, you know, my sort of background in ethnomusicology really made me appreciate the sort of, you know, approaching the local context really leads in terms of what works for a program like this. So now I'm making, interesting that we're kind of connecting at this time, because I'm making quite a big move in my life, and I'm stepping down as the director of the Children's Radio Foundation, and we're actually starting a podcasting company called the Radio Workshop, and working with some pretty big podcasting entities in the US who are supporting us. And the goal is really to activate podcasting across Africa. And we're specifically going to be working with African journalists who have all across the continent who have reporting skills, but who've never worked in audio. And we often, interestingly, get contacted by journalists, and they say, oh, you know, I want to make a podcast that sounds like This American Life, but it's set in Addis Ababa and it's for Ethiopians. And you know, those of you who listen to podcasts might know This American Life, one of the most popular podcasts in the US. So we're launching a new show that's called This is Africa. And it's a podcast that's really trying to bring out deep dive, nuanced stories from across the African continent, and really focusing on high production values for an international audience, but also really thinking about how we can build a strong African audience that is not necessarily going to be listening or downloading their podcasts on their iPhones through the Apple Podcast app, but putting them out through radio stations, using things like WhatsApp, and really thinking about how to build a podcast audience in Africa where it's still really very much in its beginning stages. So I'm happy to send this out, but you can also look at it. The show we're launching, you can hear the pilot episode. It's called thisisafrica.fm. It's still kind of on the download because we're shopping it around with different podcast partners in the US, but we're hoping to launch around May or June. And I'm really looking forward to seeing where this goes. We really see it as a place where African journalists can tell the stories that they've always wanted to tell about the continent, and supported by really, really outstanding sort of editorial teams to help them do that. Oh, that just stopped my sharing. So yeah, that's sort of where that's where I'm at. That gives you a good sense of what we're up to. I'd be happy to kind of, you know, address any questions or just kind of speak about what you all are interested in. But I just really, I want to say that I think often about how the Center for World Performance Studies really got me here where I am sitting in this chair in Sea Point, Cape Town, in doing the work that I do and really starting to think across the different boundaries of discipline, of music, of practice, of civil society, of the university. And I'm just so, I can't thank you all enough. And it's just really great to be in this weird virtual-esque room with you all and seeing faces I haven't interacted with for a long time.
Thank you so much, Mike. So I'm going to invite Lani to take over now. And let me see if I can spotlight.
Okay. Well, kia ora, talofa lava, havadai, aloha, and good morning. Greetings from the Indigenous Pacific. I want to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous people of the Midwest, the Upper Midwest, the Potawatomi, the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe, and many others. And shout out to the Indigenous peoples wherever you're coming in from. And mahalo, Ingrid, for inviting us all and inviting me here today. So aloha kakayaka o nohe Lani Teves koinoa, noeva maiau, he Hawaiiau. Good morning. I say it's about 6:30 here in Hawaii. The sun is finally coming up. I live in an area called Ewa, which is kind of like on the southwest side of the island of Oahu. I greet you today as a Kanaka Maoli, Native Hawaiian person who had the really, really great privilege of coming to Michigan to learn. And in truth, when I left Hawaii, I couldn't have told you where Michigan even was on a map. I have a very vivid memory of meeting Amy Stillman and telling her I didn't even know where that was, you know, after I had been admitted. So it was very much like coming to another country for me. It was like a huge shock in every way. And so I really can't emphasize how life-changing and transformative moving to Ann Arbor was for me. I left the job at the FedEx Kinko's to come there. So that was kind of like my life trajectory at the time. So thank you for having me. It's a deep honor to enjoy, to reconnect, and it's given me an opportunity to reflect on my experiences. So I completed my PhD in American culture in 2012, and I believe I was part of the 2007 cohort, and I was the second cohort, I think. And at that time, I was really directing myself within performance studies and then even ethnomusicology, even though I didn't really know what that was. I recall in classes and in Ann Arbor in general, feeling really antagonistic even towards some of my classmates. So special thanks really to Amy Stillman and Christiane Castro for being patient with me and actually encouraging me to calm down a little bit, which I think was useful. And then so the CWPS is what you folks say, the CWPS cohort I was actually in, I was able to make great connections with classmates who felt a similar sense of disconnection, dislocation in Ann Arbor, because we felt really actually out of place And because we were so far away from our research, and surprisingly then, the residency outside of our home departments provided an opportunity to take stock of our place in academia, to be self-critical, and to imagine what our futures might become. And so, as I said, I was pretty deep in my grad school angst, like really deep. I think our group even called our project "We Interrupt This Program" for our final project, because we were really intent on disrupting things, whatever we imagined that to be at that time. But reflecting back on it, it really gave me these like invaluable tools to apply like the theoretical work of performance studies in my specific field or corner of the world. So when I did the residency, and I was actually concerned about this, like, does Hawaii count as international? And I was really concerned that it would be almost like too American to think about. But none of that, that was my own anxiety. It didn't come into the classroom at all. So my fieldwork was conducted in Hawaii, where I'm from, in a musical community that I was a member of before I left. So this was also part of the grumpiness. Wasn't just the cold, but certainly it was the cold. I was really grappling with tensions and anxieties about being a person studying my own community. So all the insider-outsider debates in anthropology were like a huge part of what I was going through as I pursued the PhD. And I didn't yet have like the language to articulate or the foresight to understand what this would mean for my future research and the future trajectory of my career as it's kind of unfolded. So the research I did in those 2 summers, and again, thank you for the money, was about Hawaiian hip hop and the growth of hip hop in general in Hawaii and its relationship to a Hawaiian independence movement, as well as a quite troubling undercurrent of misogyny that nobody was talking about in this growth of Hawaiian hip hop in Hawaii. So I was trying to reckon with talking about that without dismissing the agency of performers, but then also saying like, we need to talk about this. So my pursuit of these topics came to be my first published article, and that eventually became a chapter in my book, which came out in 2018. And it was also a chapter in my dissertation. But that article in particular that I worked on and theorized throughout graduate school, and I think I even did it in my first presented about it in my first ethnomusicology class with Christiane Castro, it really helped me to bring together my commitments to decolonizing how we talk about sex, gender, and nationalist movements in Hawaii and the broader Pacific. And in the actual classes, so with Linda Dickerson, with E.J. Westlake, we spent a lot of time talking, and in an American culture classes, of course, we spent a lot of time learning about the similar struggles of Latinx, African, and African American, Asian American communities, which all just opened my world, right? And helped me to position my research interests within a larger framework and discussion of how all performances are racialized, gendered, circulated in cultural economies, oftentimes out of the control of their creators, which you all know about very well. But it was this last part that I really wanted to bring to thinking about Hawaiian performance, which is that, you know, people create things, but they don't exist on their own, obviously, right? They're constantly circulated. And I felt like a lot of that wasn't talked about in the Hawaiian context. So I really focused on that a lot, came out in my dissertation. From there, after I finished, I moved to a postdoc at Berkeley, and then I was at the University of Michigan for about 5 years, where I was able to really make a lot of great relationships with the Native nations or tribes in the area and trying to build this larger discussion of Native American and Pacific Islander relationships as Indigenous peoples. But I was fortunate also then by 2019 to get a position actually at the University of Hawaii, where I went as an undergrad. And so I left Oregon and moved back to Hawaii in 2019. And I received tenure last year during the pandemic in spring 2020. So that was like a not yet realized, but lifelong dream of mine. So we're happy that I can at least stay here because of that. But all of this is to say that I found that actually bridging this relationship between performance studies and then queer studies, which is what I got hired to teach at UH, was really imperative for my thinking, life, and career. And so now as I'm like shifting into the tenured life, whatever that means, I've taken up it as my goal to work more on creating the infrastructure in general, and especially in Hawaii and the Pacific, for future generations to take up performance studies, queer studies, et cetera, and take it to the next level of analysis. So now I'm firmly this cog in the academic industrial complex. And so, I commit my time to teaching and service and committees, which is, super glamorous. But I'm actually become very excited by doing this kind of work of building intellectual and political infrastructure. So most recently here in Hawaii, we've been working on launching a queer studies certificate. And this would be actually the only queer studies undergraduate certificate in the entire Pacific. And this work actually came out of student demands for this topic. And so then my hiring was also about student demands at the University of Hawaii for queer studies. So it was kind of like a weird full circle for me to come home and get hired to do this job. So much of my time is committed to this administrative endeavor. We actually just got approved on Wednesday, so we'll be launching in the fall. But when I came back and I started teaching here in fall 2019, it became very clear to me very quickly that even though I'm supposed to be teaching queer studies, and we know this, the theory can be very abstract, students had little information or content to work with, things to hold, things in the library, the information is just not organized. So now I'm in this weird space of trying to assemble an archive of things along with archivists in the library to kind of organize it and package it in some ways for students to understand and analyze and work with, et cetera. So we're kind of bringing together all the LGBTQ information we can find about the history of Hawaii and pre-contact, post-contact, marriage equality, AIDS crisis, all of these things, and trying to write usable narratives about this information at the same time. And so I actually really enjoying hearing about the work that we just did, because we're also in the process of creating documentation of the history of AIDS and HIV in Hawaii and the Pacific, as well as creating an oral history archive with queer or LGBT elders who basically lived through the 60s up through the 90s and were part of these activist circles to work for marriage equality and different kinds of activist struggles that went on in Hawaii, because there's just nothing written about it because of shame and all kinds of things. But also, I think nobody has sat down to talk to people necessarily. So I've kind of really been focused on that. My personal research has the pandemic kind of stopped it a little bit. I was doing research about a lounge act, Mary Kay trio in Vegas that was prominent in the, I would say late 40s to late 1960s. But I was supposed to go out to Vegas and interview some family members, but the pandemic happened, and so we're not allowed to travel, or traveling out of Hawaii it's lots of things right now. So that's kind of been put on hold. But what it reminded me all of in the grand scheme of things is that performance studies, even though, I've taken it into these kind of adjacent fields. So now I see myself more firmly in queer studies or doing the work of creating capacity for queer studies. But it was performance studies that, shifted my thinking in my early career and really just opened up my analysis, and the courses I took with CWPS, maybe I'll say it like that, allowed me to actually create this great cohort of people, and almost like a refuge in my first couple years at Michigan that I didn't even realize would support me so long into the career that I now have, which I didn't even imagine I could. So I've taken kind of like the traditional route out of CWPS, but I'm really excited about it, at least now, for now. So I'll end there, and thank you.
Thanks so much, Lani. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Ingrid. Thank you, Dr. Michael Gould. It's exciting to see some guys from the STEM School of Art, which is my other home. Thank you for all the support. And some people from UMA too have supported my work and my practice in the past. And all the other people who are in this conversation, some of you, I did not meet you personally during my time at Michigan, but I understand your labor into making CWPS the place that it is right now. So thank you for your labor. So I'm originally from Zimbabwe, and I'm talking to you right now from the 22nd district in Vienna, where I live and work. I just got into a PhD program here, which is an amazing program that allows me to continue to experiment. So a little background about me. I came to Michigan in 2017, and I have a sculptural background. I had been practicing for a while. And through an organization in Detroit called the Zimbabwe Cultural Center of Detroit, I was collaborating with some people from Detroit. And when I got to visit, I stumbled upon the University of Michigan STEMS, and I applied for my MFA. 2018, I got an opportunity to see a performance from an alum who was part of the CWPS program. And I was fascinated by the way their practices had shifted. And I started asking questions like, how did you arrive to make these decisions? And then all the questions were pointing to the Center for World Performance Studies. And I applied to the center, and besides having a big grant that they were giving, I think one of the things that happened to me is I had been searching for a long time for a way to combine all my interests in one place. I was interested in sound, I was interested in dance, I was interested in performance, and I'm a sculptor. So what the Center for World Performance Studies gave me was the tools to critically think through my practice, but also the language to write about it. And I can say a lot about the critique that I got from EJ Westlake. Dr. Michael Gould was very instrumental on a lot of levels. I remember sitting with him and talking through my ideas. And my international project, I actually went to Detroit, because I figured I'm from Zimbabwe, I'm already international. So I just crossed over 45 minutes from Ann Arbor. I was in Detroit. And I made this choreography, which we performed at the Do the Start Video Studio. And this was a project where I was looking at two dances, one traditional dance from Zimbabwe called Mbende Jerusalema, which is a pre-war dance, which has a lot of resistance in it, embodied forms of resistance. And that choreography was put together with Detroit JIT, which, as most of you would know, is a dance form that was invented in Detroit in the early 70s. So what we had is this hybrid exploration of these dance forms, these embodied forms of resistance and sculpture. And if we have time, I might show maybe 2 minutes of a video, because I think that project for me created a template of thinking. After that, I made so many moves in my practice, and a lot of things shifted in the way that I thought. And I can trace the genealogy of what I'm doing right now to that project. I don't know if I call it an artwork, but it's definitely a template. So all that work came because of the critical generosity of the people around the Center for World Performance Studies, the conversations that we had, the late night classes that we had, videos that we saw. And there's an amazing thing. I don't know if you still do it, Ingrid, where you have guests coming in. I think it's every Tuesday. So powerful. And there's a guest who came. I remember he had such an impact on my practice. He's a composer from Albuquerque. His name is Raven Chacon. And when I met him, I spoke to him, something shifted. And I think you also brought in Hiten Patel, who's a British performance artist. So those two encounters for me, I feel like I received so much empowerment that I could continue for the next couple of years. So let me try and share my screen, and maybe we could watch a video. Yes, my desktop is a little bit of a mess, but yeah, so this, oh, I think something is, I don't know if that's my audio, Ingrid.
I think, Masimba, maybe your video is still playing in the background. I like that video. We like that audio. That audio sounds really nice.
Thank you. Okay, that's definitely not my work. Definitely not my work. So thank you very much. This is what came out from conversations and all the hard work from people at STEMS and at the Center for World Performance Studies. And I'm very proud of this work. I want to recognize Halim Rasul, who is part of the dance there. There was Mike Manson and Liliane, or my friends from Detroit, all JIT dancers. And yeah, I still take a lot out of this project. And yeah, thanks to the collective work of so many people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Masimba. So now we sort of have an opportunity. So thank you again to Mike, Lani, and Masimba. It is just so nice to hear from everybody. I am wondering if we can just kind of open it up for discussion. We don't have a whole lot of time. We have about 10 minutes. And so if anybody wants to put a question in the chat or raise your hand, or there's not so many of us, I think that if folks want to just speak up, we can do that as well.
Oksana, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you very much for presentations. I have a question to Masimba about this dance that I watched. As you described it, this is a dance of resistance. Can you explain more? What does it mean, this resistance? Thank you.
So there are actually two dances involved there. One is from Zimbabwe, one from Detroit. So the one from Zimbabwe was, we started knowing about this dance in the 1800s when there were intertribal wars. The Shona people where I come from would use this dance in pre-war rituals and sometimes as a decoy. So it has a long history, and in the liberation struggle of Zimbabwe, it appeared again as a dance to bring people together and educate people about the guerrilla warfare against the British. So it's always been associated with some form of resistance, and there is something about this dance that hides its intention. So when you look at it, it looks very intimate and sexual at some part. This is a very small part that I just showed you, but it's not about that. So that's number one. Number two, the dance from Detroit, JIT, was developed in the early 70s. And of course, you know, the history of the white flight from Detroit, the economic violence on African American people by the use of white capital exposed people to that situation where they became vulnerable. This dance was born in those times. And if you want maybe to theorize it, we can think of Saidia Hartman when she says, it's a refusal for what has been refused to you. So this is a dance that people were showing that you neglected us to die, but we are here. You know, it might not make literal sense, but it's an embodied form of resistance. So what you see is a combination of those two things that are being brought together. It's just a short excerpt, but the whole performance is 25 minutes long.
Thank you.
Great. We have a question from Kelly Askew, I think, if she's... Kelly, are you still there?
Is it my turn?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me? Congratulations to everyone. These have been so inspiring and amazing what the Center for World Performance Studies has created in terms of a community of scholars. And so congratulations to all three of you on what you've achieved. Mike, it's great to see you again. I guess I'm wondering how you've created your team going forward in this new venture and how we can support you in that and just follow This is Africa and the podcasting. How big is your team? How'd you select it? And how widespread across the continent will it be?
Oh, thanks. Great. It's so good to see you. Are you sitting in a car, Kelly? Like, thanks for turning on your video in a car. You get extra points for that.
I'm at a family event, and this is the only way I could get quiet. So.
Well, thank you for coming on the list. It feels so good to have like full dissertation committee turnout at an event like this. So thank you all. So what we're doing, we're really working. Journalism across the African continent is really a complicated entity, and that some of the best journalists are actually hiding, I would use that word purposely, in nonprofits, civil society, and in sort of corporate communication. But they have sort of closet desires to do really amazing journalism that represents their countries beautifully. So what we've been doing is sort of slowly over the last 2 years building up a sort of roster of journalists who are super excited about podcasting in general, and the kinds of narrative podcasting that we're interested in. And so we're actually doing our first, starting in a couple of weeks, African podcast workshop, and it's working with a entity in the US called PRX, the Public Radio Exchange, which also sort of produces This American Life and other very big podcasts. And we're working with a lot of sort of African media collectives to train our first crop of podcast fellows across the continent. So I think what would be really interesting is if you all or any of you have really have journalists in countries that you're working in who might be really good candidates for something like this, that would be really, really exciting to kind of get some more participants. We have I think we actually had 300 applicants for 8 spots. So you can see the desire for this kind of training is pretty serious. We have a great candidate from Sierra Leone who's made the short list, which I'm really excited about. So yeah, in our team really consists of former journalists, former sort of public radio people across the continent. My role is sort of, I'm kind of doing the resource raising. I'm not doing anything editorial necessarily, building relationships and really helping to get it off the ground. But the team who's really producing the show and facilitating it represent 5 different countries and really interesting kind of public radio and media backgrounds. So thanks. I'd love to, I'll maybe reach out to you directly, Kelly. I think you might have some interesting connections for a program like this.
Yeah, the other thing, I just want to thank everybody for coming again, and also just reach out to Mike and say, maybe we can share some of these things on our website so that everybody can get a chance to check out what you're doing. That would be wonderful.
Sure.
Yeah, so we're kind of getting to the hour. We were trying to squeeze this into a lunch hour in Ann Arbor. I do want to read 2 of these comments really quickly from the chat just because they're so nice. Thank a current student who wants to thank the presenters for sharing their experiences. It's great to connect with everyone all around the world, and I'm excited to be a part of this community. And another commenter who says, I heard each presenter describe vulnerabilities they experienced at U of M and the courage it took to embrace and work through them. Thanks for navigating these difficulties and creating new ways of thinking. So I think that those are both really nice comments.
And Juliana has her hand up, and I'm just wondering if you have like a quick question, Juliana, that we can
Juliana.
Oh, sorry, Juliana, just wrap it all in like one nice package.
Yeah, no, I can,
right.
I can do a package question comment. No, I mean, just to voice my cohort members' comments in the chat is that it was so wonderful to hear all of your experiences and especially vulnerabilities. We will be producing our grant proposals and budgets very soon in our QWIPS cohort class. And I just think that we have heard a lot about the different projects and different, especially fields, because we're also multidisciplinary within our own sort of fields. And that can be a little unsettling and make us feel pretty imbalanced, but seeing the 3 of you, and Lani, I'm also in the Department of American Culture, and it's so great to see an alumni from AC. But I just think that we've been given this confidence that we can do our projects, and QWIPS will make it possible. So thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you. That was such a nice way to end this session, Juliana. So a huge thanks again to everybody. I hope that everybody will continue to reach out to each other, stay in touch. If you need contact information or, if you want somebody to connect, I am happy to be an email intermediary to help connect people so that we can continue to, nurture this network.
Yeah, for sure.